For the past 18 years, not including my 3 years in college, I've lived in a remote part of the Appalachians. Cell phone service is virtually non-existent at my house, and using the internet requires a 30-minute trip to the local library. Despite the isolation of the area, I've always considered it a tranquil and safe place to call home. With so few people around, there's nobody to commit crimes in the first place. Home is a vast expanse of rolling greenery, which in fall becomes a wild display of reds, oranges, and yellows, like the embers of a slowly dying campfire. I never could have comprehended the primal terror that this breathtaking landscape could conceal until last night. As a senior pre-med student, I've got a busy schedule. Endless hours of labs and classes, followed by nerve-wracking evenings spent trying to be accepted somewhere, stretch my nerves to their last fiber. When I saw an opening in my calendar, I felt compelled to return to the primal beauty that nurtured my nascent mind. Thankfully, my lovely girlfriend of 2 years also had an open weekend, so I felt a surge of excitement at the prospect of sharing my home with her. We meandered our way to the mountains late Friday afternoon with our windows down, bathing ourselves in the crisp fall air. After about an hour of driving, the mountain I call home came into view. As one of the largest in our area, its gently sloping base culminated in a rocky backbone that snaked its way into the distance. I shifted my car into four-wheel drive, and we began the long crawl up the rocky trail that can be loosely termed my driveway. We meandered gradually through the depths of the forest until my house came into view. More specifically, my guest house. Located about a quarter-mile from my main home, the guest house is the one we keep spotlessly clean for company, a stark comparison to our more cluttered main home. A gentle rain fell, accenting the sweet, earthy smell of the forest as we brought our bags inside. My parents greeted us, and we enjoyed a brief home-cooked dinner with plenty of small talk and laughs. Around midnight, my parents left us be, and we made ourselves cozy. A city girl her whole life, my girlfriend is fascinated by the outdoors and animals. More specifically, she loves listening to the mournful howls of coyotes. Naturally, being a mountain man, I long ago mastered the art of screeching out realistic howls and barks. On most nights, I can easily lure some lonely pack of coyotes to respond back. We huddled around my bedroom window and I let out a few howls. My girlfriend winced at the loudness and ridiculousness of my efforts, and we waited for a response. Nothing. I tried again, and nothing but the echo of my own voice responded. Maybe it's too cold, I thought. On a cold, rainy night, the coyotes are probably huddled inside their caves and crevices trying to sleep away the rough weather. Suddenly, something answered my howls. Coyotes can make some strange sounds, but this was different. A shriek echoed up the hollows, almost human-sounding, but too high-pitched and piercing in tone to be produced by a human larynx. "What the fuck?" I gasped. My girlfriend hopped up in fright. "What was that?" she asked in a nervous voice. "Bobcat, maybe," I replied. I howled once more and waited. Again, the shriek split the cold, foggy air of the forest, though this time much closer. I reached for my flashlight and shone a beam of pale LED light through the depths of the mist-filled air. I swung the beam around searching, and just at the edge of the beam, I saw something unimaginable. As a keen student of biology, I have a broad knowledge of vertebrates and invertebrates, and this was something different. It stood on two legs, covered in patchy hair that culminated in cloven feet, like a deer's. Its upper body was almost humanoid, again covered in patchy hair. The skin of its abdomen clung tightly to its exposed ribs and undulating vertebrae. On top of this anorexic-looking frame sat a head that looked at once human and at once animal, with branches of sharp antlers coming out from the back of its head. The beast loped with a supernatural litheness upon its bony legs, and it seemed to be making its way to the porch. "Go the fuck upstairs, Anna," I said with a faltering voice. Anna sprinted out of the room and up the stairs while I grabbed my trusty shotgun. I made my way to the living room, which attached to the porch, and shined my light through the window on the door. My beam was met with eyes that would scare the soul from your body. The eyes were empty and pale, like those of an aged hound with cataracts, but they were alive with a sort of ancient energy and gazed straight through my terrified, adrenaline-soaked brain. The walls of the house reverberated with a deafening explosion as I began unloading my shotgun on the door, and my flashlight fell to the floor. It seemed almost sacrilegious to be shooting at those eyes, but they stared at me with such a demonic and otherworldly aspect that I could not begin to understand their motives. Screams punctuated the roar of my 12-gauge thunder, screams from both the beast and my traumatized partner hiding upstairs. The eyes vanished in the hail of lead that I unleashed. Silence came as abruptly as the roar of the shotgun had moments before, and I frantically called my parents from the home phone. "Some night you had?" My dad chuckled in the morning. "Yeah, I've never seen a bear that close to the house," I squeaked out. "Kind of pissed about the door, but a bear like that can't be left alone. Sorry, poor Anna is too scared to stay the rest of the weekend," my dad said, still jovial. We're back at school, and I have no idea what to do. My parents would think I was crazy if I told them the truth behind this weekend, but I can't leave them there with that thing. Something that paranormal doesn't seem as though it would die at the volley of a shotgun. This happened when I was 15, babysitting my cousins. My cousins were both girls and under the age of 10 at the time. Their house was in a wealthier suburb with a big front and backyard. Neighbors' houses a good distance away. The backyard ended at the edge of the woods. We spent most of the afternoon playing outside. When it was time to come inside, the younger of the two girls was nowhere to be found. I sent the older one inside and went to the edge of the yard where they had been playing. I saw her back to me, frozen in place. I kept calling her name, but she wouldn't answer. I stared where she was looking into the woods, seeing nothing but trees in the approaching twilight. Have you ever tried one of those magic eye posters? Where it's a big messy pattern, but if you focus just right, an image appears out of nowhere? That's what it was like. All of a sudden, I was looking into the face of a stag. Something was wrong with it. It looked sick or injured, with loose, patchy fur and a misshapen, flat face. My father was a hunter and had occasionally pointed out deer that had illnesses and weren't worth taking. This reminded me of that. Fearing the animal was dangerous, I ushered the girl behind me as we backed away. Once far enough, we turned and ran. I heard it move just within the tree line, loud snapping branches as it lurched forward. We got inside and I slammed the sliding glass door shut. Peering outside, I couldn't see it at all. The night continued as normal until I heard a knock at the back door. "Hello? Hello? Hey, is anyone home? We could use some help out here." I was confused. The girls knew the voice and explained it was their neighbor from across the street. I told them to wait in the living room. I looked out the back door to see someone standing there. He repeated those same words and I explained that we weren't allowed outside. I remember thinking he looked odd, like he couldn't stand upright. He shifted awkwardly on either leg. I kept telling him no, and he kept repeating himself. Eventually, he just turned and walked off our porch out of sight. I went and explained to my cousins that we couldn't open the door for anyone, and that everything would be fine as long as we stayed put. About an hour later, I became wary of a sound. It was a gentle but methodical sound slowly circling the home. Every door and window rattled slightly. I went into panic mode, making sure everything was locked tight. We stayed in the bedroom the rest of the evening, cowering in fear from the sounds outside. Eventually, there came a knock at the door and their mother's voice called out. We all ran to the door, thankful for the night to be over. I hesitated at the door, thinking it was strange she didn't let herself in. As I tentatively reached for the knob, a sound came from the kitchen. We all jumped at the jarring ring of the phone. I hurried and picked it up. "We're running a bit late. We'll be home in 20 minutes. The voice of their mother came through. I can't remember if I said anything. We were all in shock. The parents arrived home within the hour. As far as I know, nothing else happened that night. The one thing I still remember was the pair of dark antlers left to the side of the porch. No one knew where they came from, and we never talked about it again. My boyfriend, our dog, my father, and I finally got an apartment last month. We live on the second floor, and besides our landlord, we don't have any neighbors in our section. The location is awesome since we're in an older part of town. However, it is covered with trees and a large array of plant life. With flora comes fauna, including deer signs. Late at night, you can see the beautiful night sky much more easily than in the city, 15 to 20 minutes away. Not to mention, watching the deer right outside our balcony window, hearing the bucks scrape their antlers against the tree bark, and catching coyotes making their eerie music at 3 in the morning, which of course triggers my dog to randomly bark at times and, in some cases, growl. We are still in civilization. There isn't just an apartment out in the middle of nowhere. Not that I know of, but we are still in a somewhat small town in the Midwest, and anything could happen. However, 3 weeks ago, my father and I were watching horror story videos on YouTube, go figure. It was about cryptids, specifically odd and dangerous creatures that roam forested or secluded areas, the sounds they make, behavior, and all that. To me, they're more fascinating than terrifying. Those creatures aren't real, right? It finally hits about 2 in the morning, and I tell my dad that I'm going to hit the hay. He decides to go to bed as well. so we get into our own bedrooms. I share a room with my boyfriend, and for a while we kept our window open with the fan in front to keep us cool as we slept. I had just laid my head down on the soft, cold pillow when all of a sudden I heard a few weird screeches from some animal nearby. The thing is, I know what cougars and coyotes sound like, and that wasn't it. Not to mention, around my area there have only been a few cases of people spotting cougars within the last 10 years, and why would they just walk around where there's a town with a good chunk of people? Aren't animals like that more scared of us? I wouldn't know what it was since my dog would bark at any animal. I decided to just ignore it, but couldn't fall asleep until an hour later. The next day I tell my dad about it, and he didn't really know what to think of it. My boyfriend just chuckled, thinking it was my imagination or just a coyote. He wanted me to make the sound I heard. However, to no avail, I couldn't replicate it. I just sounded silly. Then, about a week ago, my dad and my friend wanted to go for a walk and do some spooky sightseeing at night. 'Tis the season, I guess. Luckily, there is a cemetery within walking distance from us. Not to mention, it's always open to the public at any time of day or evening. As we walked into the cemetery, I couldn't help but try to shake off a weird feeling. The feeling of being watched, or perhaps it was my fear of the dark that I've had since I was little. My dad and friend still stayed close by to make sure I was all right, but they still did their thing and talked. 30 minutes passed, and we decided to take a seat on an old bench nearby just to rest, have a smoke, and we all had the feeling of being watched by something or someone. But it just kept getting weirder from that point on. All of us heard footsteps following us. I saw a tall black silhouette watching us in the distance and walking closer and closer to us as I felt its presence. And last but not least, about 10 feet away from us was something rummaging through some leaves. Once it knew we figured out its existence, we started to hear a growl we hadn't heard before, but my friend, thinking it might be a coyote, picked up a large stick, holding it like a baseball bat, ready for what was to come. But nothing. It must have run off or backed down, luckily. We were all kind of cold and thirsty anyways, so we all agreed to get back home immediately. But as we walked out of there as quickly as possible, footsteps followed us for just a little bit longer and stopped once we reached the gate, so a breath of relief hit me as I knew it wouldn't follow us back home. When I was about 13, I saw something in the trees that I couldn't understand until recently. It was some weekend in late November, and my best friend was having a birthday party. For the sake of the story, we will call him Noah. We were in middle school at the time, so we did the usual thing that kids do for birthday parties. We got some friends together and had a sleepover at Noah's house. It was 4 of us: Noah, John, Jordan, and me. His family was on the wealthier side, having a pool and hot tub, a big house with a game room, and everything middle schoolers would want. His house sat on a hill with a long driveway. He had a large yard, front and back, surrounded by trees on every side of his house. I wouldn't say he lived anywhere super rural, but he would often find deer or coyotes in his yard or hear them in the field behind his house. We were all hanging out, doing whatever kids do, playing video games and ping pong, and eating whatever we could find, when Noah's mom asked us if we wanted to go see a movie. I think it was the Hunger Games, Catching Fire, but I could be wrong. Either way, we all agreed, and when the time came, around 7 or 8 p.m., we piled into the car and went to the movie theater. When the movie ended, Noah's mom picked us up and drove us back to the house. For context, I was aware of paranormal and scary creatures, which I now know to be cryptids, but I believe they were just stories. Oh God, was I wrong? Now that I am older, I realize that ignorance is bliss. I envy my younger self for not knowing what I know now. Their mailbox sits at the end of the long driveway near the road. As we approached the start of their driveway, Noah's mom asked him to step out and get the mail. At that point, for whatever reason, we all agreed to get out with him, get the mail, and walk up the driveway. At this point, it's around 10 p.m. and it's dark outside. The only light nearby was a single street lamp coming from the opposite side of his driveway. His mom drove up the driveway, and we started heading up as well. Noah and John began to walk together in front, and Jordan and I were walking in the back. There was maybe a 15-20 foot gap between Noah and John in the front and Jordan and I in the back. Then, for God knows why, I looked at Jordan and said something along the lines of, "Let's run back to the mailbox and hide. They'll be so confused." I followed that by turning around and running back towards the end of the driveway. I didn't even check to see if he was on board. I just made a run for it. It wasn't until I reached the end of the driveway and turned around to realize that everyone was walking like normal and Jordan hadn't even followed me. Out of breath and frustrated that my prank of the century was ruined, I started walking back up the driveway, this time with a considerable distance between me and everybody else. I was looking around at the night sky. observing the stars or whatever, when my gaze shifted to the trees on my right. Maybe 30 feet from me in the trees stood what looked like a person. At first I thought it was Jordan finally playing along and hiding from the other two. I pointed at him in the trees, shouted something, and started moving a little faster. I looked in front of me and realized that all three of them were still there, walking towards the house. I froze. Every hair on my neck stood up and my stomach started tensing. I looked to my right again, and the already very tall thing in the trees began standing up straight, growing to what I would guess to be 8 or 9 feet tall. I panicked and made a run for it. I didn't look back again. I started screaming for my friends to run because there was something in the trees. I told my friends exactly what I saw, and they all laughed it off, saying I just saw a deer or a coyote. I know what I saw, and it wasn't an animal. Even though it was dark, I could see the clear silhouette of what looked like a man. I brushed it off and quite honestly forgot all about it. Until years later, as I matured and began understanding the world more, I learned about cryptids and skinwalkers, reading stories about how they are reported to take the shape of something, and then grow to reveal they are something completely different. After putting the pieces together and thinking back to that night, I believe 100% that is what I saw that night. Click on this next video if you enjoyed for more content like this, and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel.